Tough issues shaping the midterm elections. One former Democratic governor and one former Republican governor, both from Tennessee, are willing to have conversations about it all and say 4 words you'll never hear on the campaign trail. You might be right. They're going to join me live next. After the last several years of observing and experiencing American politics, you might no longer have much hope that things can improve, and you might be right. But my next 2 guests are trying something radical. They're trying to change the conversation and acknowledge that sometimes your political opponent might have a point. Joining us now, the former Democratic governor of Tennessee, Phil Bredesen, and the former Republican governor of Tennessee, Bill Haslam. They're the hosts of the new podcast, You Might Be Right. Governor Haslam, let me start with you. One of the big challenges for the nation coming together is that so many in the Republican Party, including the top 3 House Republicans, all continue to push Trump's dangerous election lies and, in the views of many critics, don't seem to have a real commitment to democracy. Congresswoman Liz Cheney last night said if needed, she would campaign for Democrats to defeat all the election liars out there. So what do you say to those who say, you can't find common ground with people who are literally trying to undermine democracy?
Well, I would say this. One of the reasons that Governor Bredesen and I started these conversations is both of us served as mayors, as governors. We were in business before. And we really believe what's gotten lost in all the back and forth argument is this idea that we have real problems that need to be fixed. And most Americans aren't out there, watching, wondering about this or engaging in an argument this way or another. They're living their lives, but they do want to understand it better. What we're trying to do is take difficult issues, show both sides of the problem so that people can understand the other side might have a point.
I get that, but Governor Bredesen, do you see my point? It's difficult to have an argument with about tax reform or foreign policy, about abortion rights or social issues if the other side won't even accept the results of a free and fair election.
Well, I mean, if we're going to get stuck on that particular issue, I don't think we're going to make any progress in doing this. What Bill and I are trying to do is to say, look, there are some issues there that are, they're very difficult and people are in hard corners. But there's a lot of issues in this country having to do, with the debt and with the environment and so on, that they're real problems that need solutions. And trying to explore with the public at large, not necessarily with the Congress, but the public at large, as to what some of those common grounds might be, I think is important. The other thing I think is important is, what I found was that, looking at both sides, you actually get to a better answer. That if you just stick to the catechism of one party or the other, it's a very narrow range of alternatives. And I guess most of the difficult problems I dealt with as governor, you solve them by doing a little picking and choosing from different points of view to get the best solution.
Governor Haslam, I know your faith is important to you, and you've talked about how white evangelicals have been drawn into the rise of conspiracy theories like QAnon and sometimes take a mean-spirited posture. Even further, you said the presence of Christian flags and symbols on January 6th showed how far off track the church has gone. What role do you see white evangelicals playing in both the extremism in the Republican Party today and also the potential solutions that you and Governor Bredesen talk about?
One of the things, if you read the Sermon on the Mount, the clear message is be different. And unfortunately, I wrote a book called Faithful Presence. My experience in office was believers act just like everyone else when it comes to the political sphere instead of being different and saying, one of the reasons that you serve in offices like Phil and I did is to actually solve a problem, to make a difference, it's not about making a point, it's about making a difference. And I'm trying to encourage people of faith to say, how can you actually make a difference? Make a difference means actually trying to solve a problem instead of just yelling at the other side about how horrible they are.
Governor Bredesen, go ahead.
Now, I was going to say, I think just focusing on the kind of backgrounds that both of us have, I think helps people to understand that point. That, we both were in the business world before politics. We both were mayors and then governors. Those are all jobs where you actually have to do something Monday morning. If there's a problem out there, you're expected to do something to begin to solve it. That's just a very different environment than you have in the Congress, for example, where there's very little problem solving going on, but there's a lot of posturing going on and working to the base. So, you know, I hope that the combination of experiences of the two of us brings something a little different to the discussion as well.
Well, let me ask you, Governor Bredesen, because you and Governor Haslam have both talked about how the worldviews of so many Americans are so dramatically different. You call it a cultural canyon between, quote, the so-called cultural elite and folks who know somebody who drives a Ford F-150. What's the root of the divide? Do you think we're living in two different Americas right now?
I think we're living in an America which is obviously divided, although my perception is it's not as divided as you would think by listening to the Congress or listening to the media. If I walk into the grocery store and see people, probably I'm sure on both sides of a lot of these issues, I mean, they're largely the same people with the same desires in life and the same intentions as to what they do. I think of it more as an urban-rural divide, I do, than anything else, and that may be inevitable given the way that this country has moved in separating that way and moving away from a more rural lifestyle as more people move to the cities. But I think it's possible to bring it back together again. We were very divided in the 30s, and World War II fixed it. I'm not suggesting that we need, want another war or something, but there will be some challenge that comes up to the country at some time that I think will help to pull us back together and find our common roots.
Governor Haslam, your party, the Republican parties, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Well, I was just saying, the truth is we're pretty evenly divided as a country. The Senate's 50-50, the House is a few votes separate. We hadn't had a president elected by a double-digit margin in the last, like 12 elections. But the problem is we've become kind of segregated by our beliefs, and so we think everybody thinks the way we do, and we can't believe anybody would think differently. Part of what we're doing with this podcast, you might be right, is modeling former Senator Howard Baker's saying of always remember the other person might be right. And that's what's lost in this in the discussions we're having today, is this idea of the goal is to get to the right answer, not to get to my answer. And so we're trying to take hard topics, present people that have two very different perspectives, and then present some potential solutions. All
right, Governor Haslam, Governor Bredesen, the podcast, You Might Be Right. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Coming up, a brutal assault over a headscarf sparks what looks like a revolution in the streets of Iran. That's next.